Okay, hello everybody, and thank you all for joining us and being with us this afternoon. We are very lucky to be hearing from members of the Trust Network, and this is the fourth in our series, Karuna's series, called Building Community Across Divides: Lessons from Near and Far. And in the spirit of our last series on the Native American presence in this area, I want to begin with a land acknowledgement and acknowledging the land from which we're all tuning in. From my home in what is called Conway, Massachusetts, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on Nipmuc land. And I'd also like to acknowledge the neighboring indigenous nations, the Wampanoag to the east, the Mohegan and Pequot to the south, the Mohican and Mohawk to the west, and the Abenaki and Pennacook to the north. And I'd also like to acknowledge the importance of the guilty verdict in the Chauvin trial yesterday, which has obviously resonated across the country and around the world. And I'm sure with all of you, and I'm sure there's much to be said, but I will leave that to our speakers. But I just wanted to make that acknowledgement as well, since I know it's on many of our minds. So to briefly introduce myself, I'm Polly Byers, and I am the executive director of the Karuna Center for Peacebuilding, an NGO based in Amherst, Massachusetts, for those of you who don't know. And Karuna started about 25 years ago and has worked in over 40 countries, bridging divides in countries affected by conflict. The series, just very briefly, has been looking at different approaches to building community, both internationally and in the US, and looking at what we have learned. We've looked at what we've learned about techniques in dialogue, mediation, and other community-based approaches, including those that Karuna has been involved in over the years. And today we are very excited to learn about some of the amazing work going on in places across the US, which should be inspiring, I think, and hopefully help us all see ways in which we can be more involved in building community in our different spheres here. Just as quick background, we launched the series just about a month ago with Karuna's founder, Paula Green, talking about her project Hands Across the Hills, which was an amazing example of the use of dialogue, building relationships to address polarization here in the US. Then we heard from partners that Karuna's worked with in Rwanda and Bosnia, talking about how dialogue was used in those two countries post-genocide. And last week, the focus was on Nigeria and work on the farmer-herder conflict there, and some of the neuroscience research that Beyond Conflict has done on polarization, both in Nigeria and here in the US. So with that, I am going to briefly introduce this great panel and turn it over to them. We will start with Prabha Sankaranarayan, who is the president and CEO of Mediators Beyond Borders International, which is an international impact organization whose mission is to build local skills for peace and promote mediation worldwide, collaborating with over 130 organizations globally. And Prabha co-leads many of the organization's partnerships, including the recently formed Trust Network, an early warning and early response platform in the US, which you're going to hear more about, and which Karuna is proudly a member of. DG Mawn is the president of the National Association for Community Mediation, or NAFCOM, and has served on the organization in many different roles, and currently serves NAFCOM as the president of the Membership Association. DG co-developed the Cultural Intuitiveness process and provides consultation and coaching to state, public, and community-based organizations on leadership development, strategic planning, and other topics. He's an attorney licensed in Illinois and Kentucky, and has worked in the state level and federal level health systems, interweaving his background in anthropology, religion, and law in a way that connects the political and the community settings. Angelia Tolbert is the executive director of the Arkansas Community Dispute Resolution Center, the first statewide community dispute resolution center in Arkansas, which works with its network of community partners, giving them access to community dispute resolution services. Angelia is a mediator, arbitrator, facilitator, conflict resolution service provider, and has served as a neutral in disputes covering a range of issues, and former director and former vice president of the Association for Conflict Resolution, amidst a variety of other positions. And Don Hahn is the director of operations with the Orange County Human Relations Commission, and has been there since 2001, holding a variety of positions, including serving as the Hate Crime Prevention Program Coordinator. He's authored the agency's hate crime report and has provided hate crime training. And he serves on a range of boards and commissions. So we are very lucky to have all of them spend some time with us because they're all extremely busy. But we're really grateful to the four of you for giving us the time to educate us about your work and your thoughts on sort of opportunities for everybody who's joining us today about maybe how to become more actively involved, what we've learned, and how to apply it to our lives. So I'm going to hand it over with that to Prabha, but just the last word is that to please mute yourselves, which you're probably already automatically muted, but use the chat function for any questions. We are going to leave some time for question and answer, hopefully, and we'll try to scoop those up and feed them at the end. So with that, over to you, Prabha.
Thank you, Polly. Thank you to the Karuna community. It is a pleasure and a delight to be here speaking with all of you, as I have long admired your work in the US and abroad. My name is Prabha, and I come to you from the land of the Seneca and Delaware nations. I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at this time. I love the title of the series that you have designed about lessons from far and near. When we started this partnership, we had come as an organization from work both in the United States and in countries across the world. And it was at a juncture in time where it became very clear that all of the lessons that we had applied in countries around the world were very relevant, had always been relevant, but became much more relevant over the past few years with an urgency that was palpable. So I want to refer to the title of the network, which comes from the crisis in trust that we experience as a nation, in democracy, and in our institutions. But it also, for me, comes back always to the kind of relationships that we build based on trust. And so when we started working together, DG and I, who have known each other for about 10 years and worked on projects in a lot of different places, what I knew was that we had a partner, a colleague, with whom we could begin the conversation beyond the first step. And that is what we built on as we created this network. And so what we're going to do today is really speak to what I have referred to in my presentations in other countries as a national treasure, which is a network of centers that if any of you has seen in any other country in the world, I would like to know about it. I have not yet seen such a network of community mediation centers. And I think of them, as you will hear more of the history from my colleagues, as having come out of that moment in time. And they were called the Justice Centers, which for me was just absolutely relevant to the moment when we came together to begin this network. So what we're going to do today actually is start at the community level. So I'm going to turn over to DG so he can begin the conversation with our partners, Angela and Don, who work in communities. They are leaders in their communities. And then we will come back to the conversation about the national network. So at this point, I am delighted to be here. Thank you for sharing the space and time with us and giving us this opportunity. And I certainly hope you have lots of questions about what you can do, because we will answer those.
Thank you, Prabha. And I'm out west of the mountains in the native land of the Cherokee and the Shawnee and the Chickasaw. And I'm thrilled to be with all of you today. Part of our conversation is to talk about that local network that Prabha talked about, and then we'll have questions at that point, and then we'll move to the broader trust network as well. So to anchor us is to appreciate that the centers that Don and Angela both represent are here because of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Section 10, in which the federal government formally established by law that there will be local community, they were called neighborhood centers at the time and justice centers at the time, that would represent the community. So any federal action would be with the community, not necessarily the recognized leaders of the community. And this was very important during this time because many times the leaders of the community did not represent the populations that were in their city, in their county, in their states. So President Johnson referred to this as establishing America's peacemakers. And Section 10 calls all of us to aid communities and individuals in resolving disputes, disagreements, or difficulties relating to practices that impair the rights of persons in their communities and thereby threatening peaceful relations among them. In other words, if there is two people having a disagreement, a dispute, a difficulty, the entire community is having a disagreement, dispute, and difficulty. And we were called to address that as a community. So very much grassroots in the community, indigenous response to that population. And when we say indigenous, we mean those who are living in that community at that time. So it's important to appreciate where they come from as you hear their stories. In the DNA of these groups that we now call Communication Centers is peace building. They are called to create space for people to come together and to sit with their conflict and decide how they want to work through that conflict. Peace building does not mean silence. Peace building does not mean placating. Peace building does not mean dominating. It means creating the opportunity for individuals to be able to create their own choices, to be able to work together in implementing those choices, and being transparent with each other of their pain and their hurt and their hopes. Along with that, each of these centers are called to social justice. So when people have the debate, how can you be neutral? We're not. We're impartial. We're impartial to the result because those in conflict need to decide through their choice creating, their conversations, their process, what that's going to look like. But we are called to point out when there is injustice and then challenge the community to create the space to address that injustice. So it's a real balance between we're not neutral, we're impartials, which makes community mediators different than many mediators who will say, I am a neutral. I'm a mediator as well, and we're taught what a neutral is. A community mediator is not neutral, they're impartial. And the last thing is democracy, and we mean it in the smallest D sense, I suppose. It is really about people feeling connected to, heard by, valued by the community they are co-creating in. That the way we are challenged to have democracy lived out in our communities is it is not about coexisting, it's about co-creating. And it is about being together and figuring out how we're going to hear each other's voices, how we want our voices heard, that we are valued, and most importantly, we are seen. We're not a neighbor you just drive by. You see us. We're not a person you don't talk to, you see us. And so that's how we see democracy, and that's what's in our DNA. So I wanted to lay out those terms. And then just to know a little bit up very, very quickly and how these centers emerged in the first 5 years, many communities, including at least one in Massachusetts, got together and said, we're going to respond to this, and we're going to create a community process on how we're going to address these issues. And in that legislation, that community, if it calls the CRS into the community relations service, they must respond. They don't have an option not to respond according to what was passed. So that relationship isn't for CRS to come in and say, I think you have a problem in the Connecticut Valley. It's for the community of Connecticut Valley saying, we have a problem, we need your help. So that together, we're working together on these issues, and we're doing it with each other, not to each other and not for each other. And it's really important. I know they're just little prepositions, but they mean a lot in our world, that we do things with. We don't things to. We're not going to come in and say, here's what you must do. And we don't do things for. We're not going to speak for you. We're going to create the space for you to be brave and for you to be able to speak or dance or sit in silence, however you need to express yourself. We're going to help you by being with you in that process. So the communication process, again, is about empowerment and recognition. It's about community mediators' sustained focus on the quality of the interaction, thereby leaving the control over the process and outcome to the participants, so each may be brave to speak their truth, increasing the possibility of sustainable conflict resolution. And we don't strive for resolution, because the surface conflict is facilitated by an underlying conflict. And that underlying conflict is facilitated by an underlying conflict that may be passed down by generations. That it's one step, poco and poco. That's what we do. And so it's about revolutionizing the conflict, so the conflict becomes something that's life-giving, that's growth-producing, that is change altering in a way that benefits all those in the circle. And so language is important for us as community mediators, and just want to go through some of that language. So if you hear it from Angela and Don, you have a bit of context and appreciating their stories. And so with that, I do want to get to them sharing their stories. And we have two perspectives, focus that aspects that Commission looks at in our ball, if you will, in our sphere. And one is the community. And we are called to help the community deal with injustices in their streets, in their social networks, in their employment networks, in their education networks, all the things that you may not even view as within the justice circle, we do, because that's where we interact, that's where we interface with people, that's where we make our connections. So with that, I want to introduce two amazing leaders of two absolutely amazing communication centers. One is in the heart of Arkansas and covers the full state, and let that sit with you with all your impressions and images and information about Arkansas. And then our other one is way out west to us in Orange County, California, and much more urban, much more compact. And so both are really different in their communities, and both are very similar in what drives them with those communities. And it is about peacemaking and social justice and democracy. And so for this one, I'm going to first go to Angela and then Don. And then when we go to the other half of our ball, I'm going to go to Don and then Angela. So Angela, if you would help share your story with those gathered about some of the work you do in the broader community in Arkansas.
For sure, but let me first of all say hello to everyone, and it is with great pride and respect that I have to say that I'm talking with you all this afternoon from the native lands of the Caddo, the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, and the Choctaw here in Arkansas. So I'm so glad that we can make mention and know from where we come. So so I'm glad to share that information. But as DG says, our center, Arkansas Community Dispute Resolution Centers, started as a result of many months of being engaged. I didn't start this by myself. I consider myself to be a co-founder along with 18 other conflict resolvers that had received conflict resolution training in a number of substantive areas. But many of us realized that we were doing commercial work, business work, family work, but there were unresolved neighborhood and community-based issues in our community that were going unaddressed and unmet. And we were mindful of making sure that we were in tune with the various community needs assessments that were going on, the community asset mapping that was going on, being involved in local coalitions and consortiums to make sure that we were putting together a community mediation center. That was our intention, that was going to be responsive to the needs that had been identified by the community members and stakeholders themselves. As DG indicated, it is about working with, not for or to, but being in full relationship. I always speak about having relationships, working relationships, not only with the people that are wanting to provide the services, but the people to be served. So we were definitely mindful of doing that. And what precipitated the creation of our center, starting with 18 months of training, planning and training our intended community mediators, was ongoing, unresolved community, neighbor-to-neighbor conflicts, increasing and continuing murder rates in our community. We had escalating truancy rates in our schools for our young people. So all of those various institutions that make up a community, neighborhoods, educational systems, we knew that we had the skills that could allow us to create the space and the place for people to work together to create a process for managing them. And as DG says, it's not always looking to a resolution, but how can we transform and elevate our relationships and our interactions in a way that we could foster and build peace and cohesiveness and unity in our community. And as a result, we were able to put together an infrastructure of key stakeholders related to truancy in some of our larger school districts and conduct and facilitate truancy summits. We were able to work with local policing to put together various trainings to address community policing issues and young people's interactions with police and programs connected to fostering peace ambassadors with young people and police officers. We were also able to be involved in a local university's Neighborhood Leadership Institute. It was a really unique institute that was spearheaded by a local university, but they did not have anything connected to peace building or mediation as a part of their curriculum. So we were really instrumental in doing that. So those are some of the things that we have been able to work with extensively and on an ongoing basis in our community to foster those justice related things outside of actually being within the justice system.
Thank you, Angela. And Don, would you tell us a little bit about the history of OCHR and also some of your community efforts?
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I am honored to join you from the land of Tongva and Acknowledgement nation here in Orange County and Santa Ana. So as DG mentioned that at the late 1960s, up to the Civil Rights Movement and the passing of the Civil Rights Act, our Board of Supervisors actually wanted to create a commission body that looking at human relations topic or human rights topics. And in doing so, they created a 9-body commission entity for the county as a pilot program. So what they did was they created this commission with 1 staff for a county. Today, our county is as large as 3 million people. So, and in doing so, they formed this commission with with the mission to build a community that fosters respect, resolving conflict, and pursuing equality. So they were realizing that Orange County was growing, and because of the history of our own county, and up to where now in the 70s or late 60s, they realizing the diversity of the county are growing rapidly. Today, we're the 3rd largest county that have the largest Asian American Pacific Islander in the nation. So, and it's still growing. In doing that, they started out by having our commission doing a lot of intake hearing from the community. And they soon realized that one of the top priority to address in our county was law enforcement and community relations issue. So we started doing some work with that by building relationship. And because we already have relationships with some of the community that were growing here in Orange County, we started building relationship with law enforcement as well. But knowing law enforcement is also connected to county and to a different city, because we have 34 different cities in Orange County. And municipal PD, for example. So we built relationship with at the city level, so that way we have the infrastructure of building trust and how to access the system and the platform, representing, or not representing, but walking with the community in their own voices, right? So because they're for example, if there's a community that's marginalized and not feeling like they have the voice, we invite them to join that platform with us. So in that way, like DG said, that we are walking with them, not for them. Does that make sense? The other issue we started working on was the quality of education in our school system. So we started working with different local school districts and start building a program that will support safe and inclusive school environment. And the goal was to empower young people to really have their own voice in the system, and also understanding the tie between school to prison pipeline, for example. How did they intervene or intercept that school to prison pipeline in our own community? So we're implementing things like restorative justice program in school. And it really started out with our conflict resolution and mediation, peer mediation in school for young people. The other thing that we're doing is called community leadership building. So we are actually trying our best to develop infrastructure that build a network within our own county that are responding to hate and racism and systematic racism in our own community. For example, our latest work since, like you said, like the murder of George Floyd have erupted into a lot of human relations and social justice issue that are woken up in our community. We are assisting many different cities in creating resolution that they adopted, or even looking at their own internal committee that we work with, and how to create what we call it racial equality and racial equity within the system. So that being said, we are after 20 years being the county entity, the county also realized that they didn't have enough capacity budget to fund the commission staff to do the programming. So in 1971 or 1970, they gave the Board of Supervisors gave a directive to our founder to create a nonprofit. And so he created a nonprofit where we are a staff on right now. It's called OC Human Relations. So this is a very unique private-public partnership. So we still have the county contract to support the commission's body, but the programming is actually done by the nonprofit. So our school program is funded by grant, fee for services, and donation, because that's a nonprofit work. For example, if we responding to crisis in our community, recently we did respond to crisis in the community where there was a hate incident that happened in our in one of our school districts, where a swastika was being displayed at the drinking party, and it erupted into it went viral, even through social media. Now, so it brought a lot of attention to the district, but the school district didn't know how to handle that. So we we respond by doing crisis intervention with the district and work with them for the first phase about how to help the community process through that crisis. Once that crisis is over, in a long-term plan, our nonprofit actually did a contract with the school district to do a longer-term strategy and intervention plan with the district. That's still happening today. So these are very unique. We realize that we're a very unique position where in a very diverse county of 3 million people that speak over 100 different languages, that we actually try to embrace the diversity that we have, but at the same time, on a daily basis, that we're trying to be aware that we need to be sensitive to the community that may not have a voice, and make sure that we included them on every aspect that we do our work. So I'm very, very happy to be here today.
Thank you, Don. I'm moving to the next slide if I can get that magic to happen. Here we go. The other half of our ball is to look at the justice system itself and how do we help to create more justice when the system just isn't just, and what can we do? And we don't see ourselves necessarily, we do adopt the term ADR, alternative dispute resolution. We prefer to not think of ourselves as an alternative, but actually the first and the primary. Let's try to talk it out before the lawyers get involved and say, here's the silence letters, you can only talk through me. And then all that does is make a conflict a higher conflict, more intense conflict. So we really work within that system to try to create avenues so everyone has access to that justice system. And so with that, I'm gonna again invite our community members to talk a little bit about that. And then after that's concluded, I'll talk about NAFCM and then open up to some brief questions before we transition to trust. And so this one, I'm gonna start with Don and with Angela. So Don, if you would tell us a story, if you will, about your work within the justice system.
Thank you so much for that. As I said, we have a great relationship with our law enforcement agency here in our county. One of the programs that we provide is that what we call dispute resolution between law enforcement and community member is called Police Community Relations Reconciliation Program. So that's actually a form of mediation for low complaint cases that reaches into our police department or even into our sheriff department. If they see that it's mediatable, or if the community member is asking for mediation, we actually provide that services to the county. The other part where I'm proudly to say was, we don't always do in crisis response or conflict response. Majority of our work is actually prevention. So one of the things that we have a contract to do with our the county in our Orange County Sheriff Academy was to do a cultural sensitivity training to the recruit, to the cadet that actually are in the 6-month program before they become peace officer. And in this training, what we do is we do implicit bias / culture of understanding training with them. We have a day with them before they graduate. So part of that training was to bring in a diverse panel in our community. And what we do is providing that opportunity for the cadet or the recruit to have pretty honest and open conversation with our panelists. You have panelists from the LGBTQ community, from interfaith community, from different race and ethnicity in our community. And the whole goal to that is talking about how do we build respect? What does mutual respect looks like? And how do you build trust, right? The key term is relationship and trust. We always said to our cadet is that when you patrol your area, even though that's your assignment, but that assignment area is someone's home and someone's community. if you're going to go into and work and be a liaison or be the protector of that community, how do you gain trust from the community member, right? So that's something that we've been very proud of in the last 20 years or so, that we've been part of that training internally, and bringing marginalized community to be part of that training so that that connection could happen. Just want to share that. Angela? Oh, you're still muted.
Similar to the work that Don's organization is doing in California with community policing, we're doing some of that work here in Arkansas. And we're always mindful and focusing that work, as he just stated, about underpinning relationships and trust. And we are always advocating for preventing people from actually having that first police interaction. And then on the other end, if you actually have that police interaction, how can we transform? I'm going to go back to DG's initial statements about transforming the interaction and the relationship in a way that that person, quite frankly, does not come back to the justice system, or they're not a recidivist. And we've been active with programs that we have been doing actually on site at various Arkansas Department of Correction facilities, at one of the maximum security units here in Arkansas, Tucker Maximum Security Unit. We have been participating for more than 10 years with a program called Unity, and it's UNI Helping Teen Youth. And you can Google it. There's been a PBS documentary on the program, but we have created a conflict resolution program that's a part of that 6-month program that inmates can be transferred from different facilities within the Arkansas Department of Correction and come to the Tucker Maximum Security Unit and take the 6-month class. It's a gang prevention training program, and you are taking inmates who want to be mentors to young people on the outside that might already be involved in gangs or thinking about being involved in gangs, or for sure involved in criminal activity. They might have had their first referral to a juvenile court and have their first court case. But I teach conflict resolution. At other times, I've taught actual mediation training and skills to some of the Unity brothers. And we do it in a way that some of the Unity brothers will not ever get out, but there are many of them that will be released. And we hope to have them, and we have had them connect with our centers once they have been released, to become continuing mediators for us and actively engaged in some of the gang intervention and prevention work that we do in the community. We're active very quickly in county jails, doing 5-week anger management courses for males and then 5 weeks for females. We're active in re-entry coalitions in our communities all over the state. We're hoping to continue to provide pre-release, what we have termed re-entry facilitated dialogues, because we know that when people get released, they're going back to their communities, back to their families, sometimes to communities and neighborhoods where they victimize people that are on their own block. They're going back to families that had ongoing conflict with them before they were incarcerated, but they're still having ongoing conflict with them. So we hope to have some facilitated dialogues prior to the person's release to address those conflicts, to address how they're going to come in, re-enter their society as a productive citizen, figure out bank accounts, information, all of those things that would cause people to go and commit that first crime that might cause them to become a recidivist. So, but to do some planning beforehand to make sure that we're proactive and preventative on the front end. And then we've been active with school districts and school systems with diversion programs. In our communities, for sure, here in the capital city, our school districts had the highest incidence of school-based arrest of young people at school. research was done that indicated that our young people were not being arrested by the police at school. You would think that they were taking a necklace or a bracelet at the mall. That just was not the case. The largest number of students were being subject to disorderly conduct charges and characteristic threatening while they were actually at school. So to dismantle that school to prison pipeline, our organization has been involved in a number of diversion programs that offer, instead of the student being charged or getting that charge at school, being arrested at school, that situation is diverted to a mediation program or other interventions and prevention services so that the student is not getting that first charge. So those are some of the programs that we have been actively involved with, directly connected to the justice system.
Thank you, Angela. And we're going to now move to just a little bit about NAFCM, and then I want to open up for some questions before we move into trust. Do want to thank our host here for having us, and of course, Trust for and Prabha for the invitation to not only co-create, but to be in this space with you. In 1994, NAFCM was created because people didn't know there were these great centers doing this amazing work. And many times the centers that were surviving were not thriving because they were having to depend on court fees and the court to keep them going. And that meant not doing some of the work you heard Don talk about that he's doing out with the schools and the police departments, not doing some of the work you heard Angela talk about with the prisons and with gangs that prevent people from going into the court system because the judicial system was, if we're paying you, this is what we need you to do. And so in 1994, they created NAFCM. So just want to stress that it wasn't some wise soul said, let's have a national organization. It wasn't some folks coming in saying we need one. It's actually the folks that were doing this work, like Angela and Don, saying we don't have time to think about these national things, but we know we need to. Because otherwise people are going to continue to be Christopher and Christine Columbus and think nothing is going on here. So I'm going to set up a program here. If only they knew this secret sauce, I know that will happen. And in our particular culture, we look for that silver bullet all the time. There isn't one. This is nuanced. It's complicated. You know that. I think most of you are mediators, if not all of you on this call. You know what I'm talking about. So when they created us, they said, we need you to aggregate our wisdom. And so we have a virtual library. We have a whole webinar section that graduate students go through to do their studies from. They say, we need you to amplify our voice, which is a great opportunity giving us today, so you can hear the great work they're doing. So if you have a nifty idea, before you go run and do it, see if you have a communication center in your neighborhood. Contact them. If you're not sure, contact me. I'll connect you to, and then you go play and have fun. I don't need to oversee. I don't need to do anything other than to make sure you guys are connected. And then enjoy yourselves and enjoy your creativity and co-creating together. And then the last one was to make sure we advance the work of community mediation and who we are, and that we come from that Civil Rights Act, and we don't forget that that is our root. That is who we are. We're not going to be different than that. We don't believe civil rights should be a partisan issue. We recognize it's political, but it shouldn't be partisan. It should be something we all want to strive for together. Our Constitution says that. So let's strive for that. And so I just wanted to give you a little bit of why I'm sitting here is because of working for Angela and Don as their president of NAFCM. And so with that, I just want to open up. If you have questions of either of them, feel free to unmute yourself and ask them directly. They're perfectly capable of answering. And we'll have that for a few minutes. And then I get the pleasure of turning it back over to one of the most amazing people I know, who I've been blessed to know for more than a decade. And that would be Prabha, and she's going to talk a bit about her work as well as our work together with Trust. So questions for Donna and Angela, please do not be shy.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, so go ahead. So I've got one from Kim, but go ahead and unmute yourself as DG just said. She has a question for Don. I'm sure there's a lot of questions after that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Of course, we're all, thank you, Polly. We're all, reeling from the trial in Minneapolis, which is, of course, where I'm from. And I'm very curious to know if you've got any data that shows this community mediation helps to reduce incidents of police abuse in the community.
In Orange County, there's
Yeah, I mean, there's always a bad actor in any police force, and this is we hold them accountable and we remove them from the police force. But the efforts to do the outreach and build the trust with the community, is there evidence that there's less abuse, and more? I'm sure there's more trust, but is there less abuse in the community by, or fewer accusations of abuse against the police as a result of the efforts that you do?
it depends on who you ask, because if you are, I mean, for us, the indicator is that, knock on wood, we have not had any crisis to respond to in the last few years. What that means is that there has not been a place where the tension between law enforcement and community was so high where there's civil unrest, which we have dealt with before. Because you all know that last year was, because of the lockdown, in our community, there's not a lot of chances where people get to interact with law enforcement. With our county open up again pretty soon, the state is going to go open up. Our hope is that when people haven't seen each other in over a year, how do people going to react being in the same space now? And we're preparing ourselves to do what we can to make sure that we provide things like de-escalating conflict presentations or things like that. But in terms of data-wise, I know in the last couple of years, there have been some law enforcement and community interaction that people are still fighting for justice in a way that, there's a couple of folks that individually in our county that have lost their life in the process of engaging with law enforcement, and that's still being looked into, because the case is still open. So would not except from the larger issue that Angela and I talk about as a nation, we're not exempt from that issue, that the challenges that we have, and we're pretty big county. So yes, so I hope that helped.
And if I could, I wanted to just add that when we first started, we had to make a business case for our community mediation center's interaction with the police departments, right? And when you look, we were able to get the police data just on the numbers of their 911 calls, the repeat callers. I mean, some of the officers just knew by neighborhood, these are the houses that we're repeatedly going to, right? And just the man hours and we all know that if you go to a house about the fourth or fifth time, it's really going to get violent. So what we were successful in doing is talking about the fact that our processes and approaches, as DG said earlier, and I keep saying this, it's about transforming our relationships and the interactions among the people. And our processes are rooted in self-determination, empowerment, and recognition. That's the old Foger and Bush transformative mediation. So if we are afforded an opportunity to go out to the house or the neighborhood by the second interaction, and we can have a gathering and create the space and the place where everyone feels valued to discuss how the police comes to our neighborhoods with sirens blaring or disrespecting the people here, and there needs to be a new approach, and maybe on our block you need to make sure that you're talking to Miss Johnson as opposed to talking to her 3 grandsons, but getting some understanding, greater understanding, and people having defined roles and interactions, but valuing the neighborhood no matter what it looks like. It's people's homes. That if we are afforded when I say we, community mediation centers and our volunteers and our mediators are able to create those spaces and those foster and facilitate those dialogues. Oftentimes the police recognize that they didn't have to go out to that neighborhood the next time, but because of being involved in our processes, they are now have a working relationship with Miss Johnson's 3 grandsons. They actually don't run when they see the police car. So the amount of money saved could be significant without all of the repeat calls. But even more important than money saving is the enhanced safety that we get, not only for the police officer now, because he doesn't think that Miss Johnson's grandsons are going to shoot at him, but now there's also a greater sense of people valuing my place and space in this neighborhood, even if it happens to be on the sidewalk, maybe at 11 o'clock at night. Miss Johnson's grandsons doesn't think that when they see a police car, they're going to get shot. So, and that's the type of stuff that's just invaluable.
I will say to that question, police departments are moving as we're looking to reimagining policing to working much more closely with communication centers and actually having mediators come out with them to de-escalate and then make that part of the agreement when they leave is that the parties will attend mediation. So there really is so thank you for the question. Very much appreciate it. Polly, are there others in there before we switch over to?
No, but you did
Prabha?
answer. I mean, thank you. Gail had asked, which, was there, for instance, which was my first question when I first heard you do this briefing, like, hey, I've never heard of these. Is there one around here? So I go to your website. I'm like, well, looks like there actually is one. So that's so that for people who didn't see, Gail said, is there one, for instance, in Western Massachusetts? And you said, yes, there is. Happy to connect. But I mean, the reality is that many people, I'm sure in many areas, do not know they exist. I don't know. Maybe, or Angela and Don, you're in very different areas, but it sounds like you're very active. And it does sound like this is kind of a question, but the partnerships you have, schools, jails, with police, different community. I mean, that is what gives you so much sort of insight and input, obviously. So I'm sure they vary in different regions, more rural regions are going to be smaller, but I suppose, I don't know what you would say to people in community XYZ, wherever people are sitting who are tuning in here, like, hey, there's an issue that we don't think is getting addressed. I guess first is see if something like that exists, huh? I mean, what would you say to people?
I would absolutely say see if there's a center that does exist, reach out, we'll let you know. We also, through the amazing efforts of Prabha and the Trust Network, we have materials, and we've been now developing 5 centers in Georgia, Alabama, and Florida because of the voter suppression. And so even we have people contact and say, hey, I want a center here, there isn't one, and I can't carry this burden by myself. I'm an amazing mediator, but I can't do it. And so we've been able to now work with those communities, and we'll be having centers before the next election actually established with those connections, so people have a place to go to and a place to really work on some of those systemic issues. So yeah, and that's a great segue to Trust. I do want to let people know Don has a hard stop on the hour. So thank you, Don, so much for sharing your story. And if you want to reach out to him, please do so. I can always connect you if you don't have his contact. We're blessed that Angela will be able to stay with us. Right. So at our next break, she can certainly talk about some more local questions. So with that, I'm going to move back over to my partner there, Prabha, and she's going to walk us through the Trust Network.
Thank you. So, how many of you, a show of hands if you would, work outside the United States? Just any others? Oh, let me go back to gallery view. I see a few, page 1. What about the next one? Up, they're not on screen. All right. I ask that partly because you've had voices from far and near. If you were working at capacity building in another country, what is one of the first things you would do? Evaluate the local resources, right? Look at what is already happening. Because if we are doing our work responsibly, we're not just analyzing the conflict, we're analyzing the resources and the peace factors that contribute to peace also. So if you walked into a country and found this national network of centers that are embedded in their community, supported by legislation and connected to make systemic change, would you not partner with them? Would they not be the sustainable source of revolutionary change? That's the way I think about the National Association's network of community mediation centers. So when I said that we have a national treasure, I mean it. It started at a time in this nation's history that was a critical period, and we are at another inflection point. We will have many opportunities, even as we exhale from yesterday's verdict. We know that the work is ongoing. It needs to be, and it needs to be at the community level. So at Mediators Beyond Borders, we believe that people at the heart of the conflict should be at the heart of building the solutions. So I can think of no better partner. What happened last year? So I'll come back to what is the Trust Network? Why did we do this? I'm going to share screens. Let's see if I can view from the current slide. Nope. Oh, come on. I had it already. This is really aggravating. Okay, so what happened was that in the process of the events of the last year, what we recognized was that clearly there was a need in this, at this time, for a national infrastructure. That what we needed urgently was a coordinated, multi-sectoral peace-building approach in order to address not just what was happening in the last year, over the past couple of years, but what has been happening in this country for the last 400 years, and what needs to continue to happen to make the kinds of shifts we need to as a nation, because that is the only way we get to some of the root causes of what's going on here. I think DG mentioned earlier that we're not about addressing issues at the surface level. They cannot be done simplistically. The conflicts that we face are complex and deep-rooted. Many of them go back to the genocide of the native people and the enslavement of the Africans in this country. And that is what we know as analysts and mappers. When we look at some of these conflicts, it is not enough to make the simple changes. What is needed is the kind of systemic change that we have the capacity for and need to build a capacity for. So what was happening last year was that many who had worked in other parts of the world were increasingly aware of the science. I'm sure many of you are on this call. It so happened that we came together at a point when we saw the need for an early warning, early response platform. There has not been one in this country. What we wanted was to create a platform for convening local centers, whether they're mediation centers or others. As you heard them say, some of them are small. In some states, they don't exist. In many cities, they do not exist. And in many others, they are robust and well-connected. But we wanted also to bring the wisdom and knowledge of groups like Corona, of groups like Peace Direct, who have worked in other parts of the world and have the kind of access to expertise and skills together in one place. It became really important to recognize that there was not an early warning, early response system in this country. Those of you who have worked in other parts of the world know that there are well-developed systems across countries in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in Eastern Europe. And what they require is really the coordinated effort of the abundance of organizations that actually are working in this country. So we founded the Early Warning early response platform as a part of the Trust Network. And the idea was that as the violence related to the elections was growing, that we needed to figure out a way to get information. What is an early warning system? It's basically, as our colleague Madhva loves to say, who happens to, by the way, work at a community mediation center in Massachusetts, it is getting the right information to the right people at the right time to take the right action. So what we set up within 6 weeks was what normally takes countries 6 to 18 months. And I have to thank our colleague, Alice Endurito. Alice is a Kenyan mediator who now happens to be the special advisor on genocide prevention to Secretary General Gutierrez. She just got that appointment in November. And maybe we had a small role in pushing her forward in that. But Alice set up the Uwiano platform in Kenya. So what we knew was that we needed a platform that would gather the kind of information about violence that was about to occur and find ways to communicate that back into the communities where the people who are embedded in the communities could take preventive action. So it was truly an amazing moment of collaboration that people like Polly, people like the Alliance for Peace Building, when we reached out and said, this is what we are forming, they all said, we're in. So before you knew it, there were about 25 to 30 national and international organizations, each of them who came with their own networks, who came together to say, we need to form this. One of you asked the question about whether there were fewer incidents in relation to the police. I will tell you a slightly different story, and this was about one of the first months in which we were set up. We got information about the potential for violence to break out in Detroit. What we knew was that 2 different groups who were marching were set up to collide at a certain point, thereby increasing the potential for violence. This was many of the Black Lives Matter participants and many of those who belonged to the white supremacy groups. So when the Community Mediation Center leader found out about this, what she was able to do within 24 hours was gather the leaders in the community to actually change the response of the police officers. Instead of coming out with guns and vests, they came out with baseball caps and marched alongside the people, diffusing the situation in a way that prevented violence on that day. That's just one example. So there are many others like that. We have not been around long enough to have too many examples. So what I will say is that the core group includes national and international conflict transformation organizations, many with decades of experience. We clearly aim to and will remain a transpartisan network, working at all of these levels with the idea that we all have something to learn from each other. What we envision is, in addition to the early warning and early response platform, and those who have developed early warning platforms, like our colleague Joe Bach, who is the head of the International Peacebuilding Program at Kennesaw University, will say, is that it's not much good if you have an early warning program but don't have a response. So when I think about the potential for response, I think one of the partners, the National Network of Community Mediation Centers, is right there, set up, ready to respond in as many communities as possible with whatever response is possible. But I want to be clear that what we're looking at is organizations with a wide range of skills that, if you remember the braiding that you saw in one of DG's slides about peace, justice, and democracy, it is very much along the lines of braiding pro-democracy, peace building, and social justice, racial justice organizations that we formed the network, that we really at this point have a lot of peace building organizations and are building partnerships with an increasing number of democracy and governance organizations. That if we are to have a national infrastructure for peace, it needs to braid all of those different aspects of responses and capacity in order for us to have the ability to build that infrastructure that can be preventive and responsive. So we're looking at currently the members come with all of these skill sets. And just as another example, you asked about Minneapolis, and I think one of the things we don't do as well as a field is probably write the prevention stories. Nothing happened that was there was no violence for a large part before the trials, and we anticipated and prepared for violence after the verdict, knowing that there was a potential for it. What you didn't hear about was the enormous amount of work that went into the community organizations working together, holding restorative circles, holding listening circles, figuring out what they needed to do to prepare and to prevent. And that's just another example, I think, of what is possible in these centers. So when we started, it was the three of us, as you will see, with the idea that we would bring as many of the others as possible on board, and you'll find these on the website. This continues to grow. As you can see, there are violence interrupters here. The Bridge Alliance is a network of about 70 organizations. The Alliance for Peace Building is our policy partner with another 150 organizations. Peace Direct supports local peace building. Police to Peace works directly with 30,000 police departments across the country. Weaving Community is a community of bridge builders. So these are all of the people who came on board, and we were very fortunate. We were really fortunate that both the Packard Foundation and Humanity United, as you know, Packard is now led by Nancy, somebody help me. Lindborg, thank you, who headed USIP, so really understands peace building deeply, and Melanie Greenberg, who was the former CEO of the Alliance for Peace Building before Azra, both of whom are deeply committed and really understood what we needed to do. And so they came forward with a rapid response grant and said, do what you need to. We will support you. And that's what we started. Our goal really is to continue to build on where we have come in the last, is it 8 months? Feels like about 80.
Right, probably does feel that long.
Right. And we were extremely fortunate. I say I didn't grow up in this country, and I came here and learned about the power of volunteerism. I mean, it's one of this country's great resources, the numbers of people who volunteer. Well, 2 amazing volunteers, along with the 15 others on the digital nomads that Joe Bach brought along, all of them stepped forward. No, we had no idea whether it was going to be funded or not, but people stepped forward and said, this is the moment we need to come together, and they did. And that's how the Trust Network was formed. What we are focused on now is that, having done the work for the last few months, having set up an early warning platform, we are really open to inviting all of you to participate in all the different ways that you can. Our goal is to gather as many organizations as possible, democracy and governance organizations, faith-based organizations, peace-building organizations. And the reason I will say that we are also calling it a social cohesion and security infrastructure is peace building works in Kenya, doesn't work in Kentucky. What we call ourselves is really important. You heard me in the first few months when I talked about early warning, early response. Many who work in the communities here didn't know what that meant. What I realized as we continued the conversation, that just like in any other field, just like in any other country, things are called different differently. The work that is done may have different words in international context than it does in a local context. And that's where we as Mediators Beyond Borders come in. We call ourselves multilingual, not just in languages, but in the language of mediation, peace building, community building, local work, and international work. We often use words. Words have meaning, as we all know, but sometimes it takes listening with a careful ear to hear what is going on. What we saw were many international organizations, as DG said, Christopher and what's the other Columbus?
Christine.
Christine, with the responding with the idea that we need to do something here. And so what we have really done is say, yes, we need to do a whole lot here, and we need to do it together. The beauty of the legislation, the Civil Rights Act and the legislation, is that the community mediation centers and the community CRS. What is CRS, DG?
Community Relations Service.
Community Relations Service work complementarily. So we actually have a system in which there is a federal government agency as well as a civil society organization. Again, I think this is an extraordinary gift. And if we can put that together at this time to activate the need at the local level across this country, it would have enormous impact. And one of the things you can do is through our partnership, through the work of the Alliance for Peace Building, we have really asked for, made some recommendations for the appropriations for peace building. And so as we begin to share more information, you could write to your representatives in support of increasing the appropriations for peace building. So with that, I'm going to stop. Thank you very much, and happy to have questions.
Thank you so much, Prabha. I mean, it really is, I have to say, an amazing service in a way that you have provided of this connective tissue and this coordination, because as we all, those of us who've worked overseas for many years know that one of the biggest issues, just like in so many different domains, is when you've got a lot of different people, you know, whether you're in Arkansas or whether you're in Kenya or Orange County, you know, a lot of people trying to do different things and they're not talking to each other and they're working across purposes. So the fact of trying to pull, and you would have had the same thing of, you know, this international NGO going to wherever and saying, how can we help? But trying to pull the resources, and hearing the example I heard before of the work, the support in the run up to the Senate runoff in Georgia, the kind of support you were providing to organizations there, the training that was very like immediate and hugely helpful, but this sort of coordination of bringing people together and sharing the resources seems like an extremely valuable, valuable aspect to this. So anyway, it is, we have a few more minutes. So if people have questions, as DG said before, you feel free to unmute yourselves and ask. We have Angela, DG, and Prabha just for a couple of more minutes here. So, the door is open, so to speak, to for any of you who have questions.
Go ahead, Lizzie.
Thank you. I was so grateful to learn about all of this. Thank you. And I'm curious, as sort of a younger person trying to do work in this field, I was wondering if you have advice for places to get started. I'm signed up for a mediation training in the fall, but aside from that, curious if you have any tips or opportunities that helped you along your way.
I would ask,
Go
where
ahead.
are you?
Oh, I'm in Northampton, Massachusetts.
Okay. And probably the wise one will jump right in. My only thing is connect with your commission center. Do some volunteer work, really get to know what they're about, and then it'll give you insight of where do I want to put my talents? How do I want to use them? And to grow with that. It would be an amazing opportunity right in your backyard, and there is a center right near you as well. But I'll let Prabha reply some more with that.
I started at my local community mediation center. I will tell you, it is all local. I worked for 25 years in Pittsburgh as a clinician, and at a point in my career where I really needed to add to my skills because I found myself not adequately responding to the families I was seeing. I needed additional skills, which is why I started training as a custody mediator, because the judges were referring all their divorce cases to me. And that was the beginning of the end of my clinical work professionally, into first mediation and then into peace building. And my work has grown from there. What I would say is look for every opportunity you can to do as many different things as possible to figure out what strikes a chord in you. For me, it's transformative work, it's restorative work. I truly believe, having worked in the field of trauma for as long as I did, hurt people hurt. And unless we can figure out how we can have different kinds of relationships, we are going to continue patterns that are not doing us much good. So try as much as you can. We have a young professionals group. You're welcome to join. They're all on board. There are amazing practitioners who serve as mentors, which is one of the things we often hear young professionals asking for. Where can I get the experience? Where can I get the experience? I have another colleague, Meredith, who worked in Kenya for humanitarian dialogue for many years. One of her pieces of wisdom is, find the most complex, dirtiest, difficult place in the world and get some experience there, because that will serve you well the rest of your life. So I share Meredith's wisdom with you.
Anything else from you, Angela?
Well, fortunately or unfortunately for us, those of us that are in the conflict business, we know that conflict touches everything. So that means there is just so many different areas in substantive topics that you could be involved in the conflict resolution field. And we know that people work the hardest and stay committed to work that is in line with their passions. So if you know that you have top 3 things on your list of passion or things that fuel your life, I'm sure that there's probably some conflict going on connected to that. All right. And I think if you reach out to people that are doing work in that field, I know that people in the ADR world are always looking to bring on new people and to expand the growth of our profession. So I'm sure that you will probably be able to connect with some people that can help you foster and expand your interest in the field.
Did that help, Lizzie?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay,
Right. Can I just ask a question there? I think that I'm sure people have other questions, but in terms of like the deeper issues. I mean, there's the issues that I would imagine, but Angela, you tell me I'm wrong, that you deal with. I mean, it's all level of, but more immediate issues, right? Of people, whatever, schools or prisons or whatever. But in terms of sort of the bigger, as you know, I think probably, or whoever started with of structural racism, the genocide that went on in this country of Native Americans. So you've got these big issues that are kind of underneath everything, the conflict below the conflict below the conflict. What would I just be interested to, of all of your takes on, of how you would say you see the trust network, the community mediation centers sort of trying to facilitate dialogues, or how you see what your thoughts are about trying to facilitate dialogue and discussion, whether, there's issues, there's obviously, different towns developing, approaches to reparations. There are different, all sorts of different levels of initiatives. Of your thoughts on that, of how people, if they're interested in that, where do they go? What do they do?
Well, let me take a small piece of that, in that no matter what the issue is, fundamental to the work that we do is the commitment to diversity and appreciating that conflict is happening in so many different shape, forms, or fashions. And I think that's why the Trust Network has been formed with so many different organizations, with so many different types of expertise, people utilizing so many. I think there was a slide with all of the different types of approaches. And we know that when you talk about taking on these huge issues, there's not going to be a monolithic approach. I mean, it's going to, you know, I heard someone recently say that microaggressions were like being sliced a million times, right? A slow death. When we're talking about taking on things that are a huge, like, you know, racism in America, the salve that we put on those wounds are going to have to be applied a million different times in a million different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe that the structure and the infrastructure that is the trust network could be that salve, no matter what form, if it's an ointment, if it's a gel, right? And I'll let DG and Prabha comment from there.
The only thing thank you, Angela. The only thing I wanted to add is that many of our centers are holding that space. We'll be talking about that in May. Illinois has reached out to their commission centers to actually hold the space for them, so they can be totally lean into their disagreements and their however they want to form it, and it frees them up, these leaders, to really just be real and not worry about, oh, I have to be whatever in this room. And our centers, not all of them, but we have a center that's helping the conversation about the 13th Amendment and abolishing the 13th Amendment as well, that goes into this. So again, as Angela said, different centers are capable of doing different things, and have that support to start it, because the centers were there before you realize this is an issue, then can be there after you decide to leave. And the beauty of the trust network, as Angela's spoken, is probably, and the trust network is brought in so many different types of national groups that it helps for the center to go, this is the salve I need here in my center, in my community. So it allows that national group or international group, in your case, Paul, to have a pipeline to, okay, this is the salve that will help the center. And what we're trying to do with the trust is have our national partners actually lay out what the salve is they're offering, so that the communities know, am I standing in front of a deli? Am I standing in front of a bodega? What am I standing in front of? So I know whether or not it has the salve that's going to help my community. So again, Angela laid out both the importance of the stability of the center and the importance of the trust network of making that connection with those salves. So I love your visual, Angela. I'm going to start using that.
I do. What I do think is important is that instead of there being, 3,000 disparate efforts, if there is some attempt at coordinating it, I'm not saying we do the same things everywhere at all. If there is some attempt at us raising the standards, and one of the things I will speak to is, I think, a tension that peace builders may be experiencing for standing up against oppression versus building bridges across divides. And that may be a false dichotomy, but speaking to the neutral and the impartial and the omnipartial, it will take justice, democracy, and peace building skills for us to do this together. So the community mediation centers are working with institutions. They're working with local advocacy organizations. And in those places where there isn't one, I would say step forward. If there is somebody else there, step forward and become a part of the trust network so that we can replicate at the local level the partnership we have at the national, so that we can bring to bear the resources at the local level. That's the idea, that they can convene the spaces there. But if we do it in a way that weaves into a national infrastructure, I think we can be more effective than 3,000 efforts that are going in different directions. So if we were, for example, amongst the things that I remain hopeful about is that we have these national conversations at the local level about transforming the police, about changing the institutional, the systemic, embedded issues in our healthcare system, in our education system, that we have these conversations at the local level nationally about reparation, meaningful change as a part of reparation. And I think those can happen. That's why even partnering with, I don't know if you know the work of Dr. Gail Christopher with the Truth and Racial Healing program that started out of Kellogg's. I mean, it's an amazing, she is a force, is an amazing person. For those who don't know her, I would highly recommend looking her up. You know, until we can get to the point where we can jettison, as she says, these old-fashioned ideas of the comparative worth of human life, we can't make the progress we need to. And I can't think of better places than local centers to have these conversations, but that build the groundswell to the national level.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And that's a wonderful way to conclude it. It makes me think, of course, some of you or many of you on the call may be aware, but there is a, you know, legislative proposal to have a U.S., kind of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that is taking shape. But what is that going to be made up of? It's going back to Angela's solves. You know, it's like lots of different little pieces. How do you get to these big issues? You know, it's a lot of hard work at a lot of different levels. So I cannot thank the three of you enough. As you see in all the comments, it's been completely inspiring for people. I mean, I think, you know, all of us have learned a lot, because I'm speaking for myself, did not know about mediation centers until I first, you know, encountered you all. And so I think it's just extremely informative for people to know what's out there and how they can connect to them. So I really, to the three of you, Prabha, DG, and Angela, you know, you guys have a lot that you are doing and handling, and thank you for your work, and really thank you for your time today. I really deeply appreciate it. And I know I speak for everybody who's been on the call. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you all. Thank you all for having us.
Good night, everybody.
Okay. Good luck.
Really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.